Alana. It's all yours.
Hello all, and thank you, Jill. It's been a long wait in such an exciting day, but here we are ready now. I'm excited because we get to talk about action. So our session's about communities taking action. I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm sitting here in the streets of our rural city of Benalla, which is in northeastern Victoria, on the lands of the Yorta Yorta, Bangarang and Tungarongs people. And I'd like to pay my respects to their traditional owners. Suzie Pearce is sitting here with me, and she's here to talk about the North East Rail Alliance and Better Benalla Rail. And Kate Gunn down there with that beautiful picture of the Liverpool Plains behind her is coming to us from her farm and talking to us about the action they're taking in her group, the Liverpool Plains Action Group. And Jacqui, welcome Jacqui, lovely to see you. And Jacqui is from Sydney, and she'll be talking to us about offshore gas mining and PEP 11. So very welcome, warm welcome to you too, Jacqui.
Thanks, Lana.
We've already had our community independent members of parliament speaking to us this morning about their role in helping communities take action and their notions about the sort of reciprocal relationship between the member of parliament and their community and how that can create an environment for communities taking action. But the case is that not all communities have a member of parliament that they can collaborate with. And so today that will be part of our discussion because that is the case for two of our guests today. But let's just step back a bit and reiterate what was said this morning when somebody quoted Cathy McGowan from many years ago saying, the cavalry's not coming, there's only us. And you know, that there is so much truth in that statement. And we all know that because communities have been taking action forever. And really, when you look at it, most of the big social change that has happened in the last 5-6 decades have all come from community movements. And so really progress in society relies on all of us to come together and create the momentum for these things to happen. I was delighted this morning when somebody sort of updated Cathy's statement, one of the independent members of parliament, who said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I thought that was a great statement. And I think we probably can all identify with that because we know what it feels like to be on the menu. The sense that we've had of being not consulted, to not have a voice, to feel like that things were just happening without any sense of what the community wanted. So this is about being at the table, which I know is going to be one of the topics of conversation in our discussion. So we've got 3 case studies today, and the first thing I'm going to do is turn my attention to each of you and ask for a really just brief overview of the issue that's of concern that you've been acting on and your community groups have been acting on. So Kate, I'm going to come to you first. So you're the Liverpool Plains Action Group, and we can see that lovely photo behind you. Can you just quickly tell people where are the Liverpool Plains and what the issue is there, what the issues of concern are, and why you formed this action group?
The Liverpool Plains are approximately 400 kilometres northwest of Sydney, and it's a magnificent farming region. So as you can see from the photo, there's some wonderful deep black soils, and it is widely regarded as some of the best agricultural land in Australia, if not the world. And our problem is that we are not only have this wonderful black soil, but underneath that wonderful black soil are mineral resources like coal and gas. So our problem originally started in 2007 when there was some coal exploration licenses issued to BHP and then to Shenhua that were smack bang in the middle of the Liverpool Plains. So that's when our fight began. And then in 2021, John Barilaro came up and announced so both of those mines were extinguished, or the proposals were extinguished. And we thought we had won our battle. And then only a few months later, the New South Wales Future of Gas statement came out, showing that we were now pegged for gas extraction. So our battle continues.
Yes. And so just tell us a little bit of the history of the community action in terms of the first group that started and how it got reinvigorated.
Yes, so the first group started, we were the Karuna Coal Action Group, which started in 2007 with the issuing of those exploration licenses. And then once those coal mines, so that was a very community driven, very active group that involved, everyone really that lived in that area and around. And I think we had maybe Australia's longest blockade. We blockaded BHP for over a year. And there was also coal seam gas had also, the notion of it had begun then. We blockaded Santos as well. But when the Santos proposal was gone, it seemed that we had, protected the Liverpool Plains in perpetuity for agriculture. But then when the Future of Gas statement came out, we decided to repurpose the Karuna Coal Action Group to become the Liverpool Plains Action Group, because the footprint of the proposed gas developments is significantly larger than the two proposed coal mines. So we expanded the area.
Yep. And you've stepped up to be the chair of that group at the moment, Kate?
Yes.
Yes. So this is a long-term commitment on your part.
It seems so. Ideally, we'll beat them quickly, but
probably not.
Probably.
Thank you. I'm just going to turn to Suzie now. So, Suzie, tell us about the Northeast Rail Line and the Inland Rail Project and Better Benalla Rail.
Yes, a trifecta there. The Northeast Line operates between Albury, Wodonga and Melbourne, and it is leased by the ARTC and is going to be used for the Inland Rail Project. It currently is used for interstate freight movements. It is used by the XPT passenger service between Sydney and Melbourne, and by the Northeast rail passengers using V-Line trains. So that's an introduction about what it is. The issue of the Inland Rail Project is that 12 major works were identified to allow the Inland Rail trains to transit our station areas. These trains are 1.7 kilometres long and will be double stacked freight trains. So to allow them to go through some of our stations, the existing overpass bridges are going to have to be doubled in size. And therein lay the first issues that caused us our major concern. The thing about this is that there are 3 of these new bridges that were required amongst the 12 major infrastructure works. Each of these towns is of various size. Each of these towns is in a different council, has a different council. Each of these towns has different issues. So it is very complex and requires each community to deal with it themselves. Benalla is lucky. We are a reasonably sized community, but when you get to, say, Glenrowan, which is just north of Benalla, that community has 89 people. It's very hard for them to fight a very determined bureaucracy to have them implement their project. And it has been very difficult for them.
So, Suzie, just give us a little bit of a glimpse of why the Benalla community was very unhappy with the engineering design that the Inland Rail Project wanted to implement.
They were particularly unhappy for a range of reasons. Firstly, the way it was promoted to them. It was promoted in conjunction with the upgrade of the Northeast Line, which meant when they went to see various people in the community, they didn't make it clear the notion of how large and how serious the works would be. So they spoke to residents immediately opposite where the proposed works would be in Benalla. They asserted they spoke to community groups. In fact, they only spoke to CWA with 12 members. And none of them really understood the implications of the works that were going to be required. None of them understood the size of the overpasses that were required. None of them understood the concrete wall that would be facing them. And it was not an ideal example of community consultation. And if it weren't for the fact that we were once a railway town in Benalla, it wouldn't have been revealed to these, to the community immediately opposite of which there were just two people that were actually spoken to, that they would soon be facing coaches 10 meters in the air opposite them, with this huge bridge with a big concrete wall facing them as well. And concrete walls at our railway station in Benalla have a very poor history because the existing overpass now was a major contributor to our flooding in 1993. So the minute we heard about all these elements of this new overpass, bells rang throughout the community of concern.
Yep. And this was an example of engineering plans being drawn up in Adelaide. No one had ever been to any of these towns along the North East Rail line. And these engineering plans were just going to be implemented, full stop. But we'll get back to you in a minute, Suzie, to talk about how the town reacted to that. Jacqui, welcome to you. So there's a lot of people who would not know what PEP 11 is. So can you tell us like where the area of concern is and what all that means?
Of course. So PEP 11 is a permit for the exploration for oil and gas off the coastline of New South Wales, from about Newcastle down through Sydney, so the northern beaches where my electorate is, and then further down to, you know, the Bondi area, which at a federal level is Allegra Spender's electorate as well. That permit has, you know, was up for renewal. And, you know, if you can, anyone who's been to LA will know that the beaches in LA are very different from the beaches in Sydney. And one of the reasons for that is that they have offshore oil and gas drilling and mining. So there's big community opposition to that permit. First, it was, you know, hardly known, but due to the amazing work of organisations such as Surf Rider Foundation and Surfers for Climate, and you know, it's just put surfing in an oil slick exactly. But due to a lot of the work of the community organisations, it was brought to the forefront, and it was an election issue at the federal election. And it was one that was quite controversial because, well, basically the independents such as Zali Steggall and then the independent candidates such as Sophie Scomps and others made it an election issue. And then Scott Morrison, in what we now know was sort of usurped power, actually cancelled the permit as a result of that pressure from independents. But because it was cancelled under Scott Morrison usurping power sort of, you know, illegally, it then became an issue for the federal court. So the mining proponents, Asset Energy, took the federal government to court. Well, the hearing was set for earlier this year around the time of the state election, and then the government settled out of court. So it's an issue that's been live in our community for a long time. I haven't met one person in our community that you know, that agrees with it, and so it is something that united multiple electorates, multiple communities, and also multiple you know, community-based organisations as well.
Yep. So can you give us an understanding of when you said it sort of affected multiple electorates and ignited multiple communities, what happened? How did the momentum start?
So I suppose the community groups such as Surf Rider and Surfers for Climate really brought the issue to, you know, I suppose to a head and let people know, because, you know, ironically, this was happening sort of, you know, 4 kilometres off our coastline, yet a lot of people weren't really aware of what the issue was. And there were some great community campaigns to bring that awareness to the forefront. And then I suppose once that awareness started, and we even found during the federal campaign, a lot of communities that maybe weren't directly on the beach, but, you know, our electorate has sort of bushland in the back of it, you know, they weren't aware of it. But as soon as it was mentioned, it was something that was, you know, almost viscerally triggering, because no one wants any risk to the beaches where we live. So it sort of became what was a community movement to start with, and then the classic federal member and state members not listening, then made it a political issue, and particularly at the state election. So I mean, the complexity starts to come around when you look at the jurisdiction of the issue, because 4 kilometres is the state jurisdiction for state waters, and then it goes into federal waters. However, this particular permit was under its approval was part of a joint authority, which included federal and state. However, federal had veto. So as you can see, it is a complex issue. And one that I argued at a state level was also a state issue, which it was, and there have been some recent developments in that area. But at that time, our state member was, openly saying it's not a state issue, and particularly when I decided to run, was even in the local paper saying, Jacqui Scruby should stop talking about this. It's not a state issue. So, in terms of your question, Alana, it definitely started as something that was drawing the attention of local community groups and also national groups and not-for-profits, but then that morphed into community action as well, and then into political action.
Great, thanks, Jacqui. So I'm going to drill down a bit now, and I'll come to you, Kate. So your electorate is one that has members of parliament that not necessarily, well, obviously aren't on side with you. So you're dealing in an environment where the community can't rely necessarily on the representation of their member of parliament. Can you tell us about your action group and how you decided to operate in that environment?
Well, up until the election in March, we're represented by National Party members. Kevin Anderson is our local member here. I should say Roy Butler to the west is an independent. However, prior to the election, our local member was even the water minister. So we had Emeritus Professor Ian Ackworth with some of our people went to see him in his capacity as water minister, flagging, Ian's predictions are, that should coal seam gas extraction go ahead on the Liverpool Plains, levels will drop immediately and impact the entire groundwater resource. And he did nothing. He just said, oh, you guys keep doing what you're doing. So that was enormously disappointing. So then post-election, we were hopeful that a new government may have their ears open and be willing to listen to our issues. So far, we've had the handball of, the ag minister says it's not in my portfolio, the water minister says it's not in my portfolio, the resources minister doesn't want to hear from you, and we're waiting to hear back from the environment minister. So we're just in that kind of ping pong stage, hopefully getting somewhere. However, there is a really supportive crossbench, so that's promising.
Yes, so we'll get on to that in a minute and that strategy that you've employed. But tell us about what it's like inside your group in a situation where you're not going to get political support directly around you. What sort of conversations take place to try and create some traction and create a pathway for you to follow?
Well, we have to stay strong as a community and, direct action is definitely something that we need to employ when appropriate, because that's a really powerful way of communicating our determination, I suppose, and also, getting a bit of attention. But there's a massive, like Jacqui was just talking about, awareness. Awareness is a huge issue for us as well, because so there's the Narrabri Gas Project, which is to the northwest of here, which is essentially an approved project, and then a pipeline that connects that with Newcastle, and then we're the next stage of development. So people aren't really thinking that we're going to turn into a gas field yet. They think the Narrabri gas field will go ahead and that gas will be wonderful. So it's, also just making people realise what is actually the plan and what is actually at stake.
Mm. And from what I understand, Kate, even at the local level and your local council, you don't have a sense of people being supportive of what you're doing.
well, I should say, so there's two shires. There's the Gunn Shire Council and the Liverpool Plains Shire Council. The Liverpool Plains Shire Council is actually quite against coal seam gas extraction in its shire. The Gunn Shire Council is basically mine anything you can in the shire. That seems to be their attitude, which is slightly challenging. So we have put forward, I mean, when we got this Emeritus Professor Ian Ackworth to present to council, and I think they all of a sudden did realise, like, oh dear, there's going to be some very serious impacts if this does go ahead. So their current position is no position. They just won't form a position because they want to support it, but I think they know that they shouldn't.
Yep. So tell us about some of the direct action that you have used over the last little while.
Well, in January, so Santos is the proponent for the Narrabri Gas Project. It has all the associated PELs and the pipeline. In January, they were doing some seismic testing just down the road here, and I think they started on a Monday. And talk about cavalry. There was 30 trucks and vehicles came out on our usually very quiet rural road with all their lights on and flashing. So it felt like the army was coming. Anyway, they did that. We had a sort of a roadside picnic to show that we didn't want them doing the seismic testing, which was, we got, I don't know, maybe 70 people. But then over the weekend, they were down a really quiet, dead end road where there's only a few properties, and some of the people who were my neighbours, they just couldn't bear to see these seismic trucks along there, so they bailed them up. And then the next morning, they put the call out, come on, we need to do something. So Sunday morning, 6 o'clock, there was like 60 people arrived just to the corner of the conservation area. Anyway, Santos called the police and had us removed, which was quite disheartening to think that they would do that at this early stage of proceedings. But that certainly, I think it showed Santos that we're very serious about it, and also our politicians. Yep.
So in terms of people turning up and being seen, there's a lot of brave people in your community who've been continuing to do that for a long time. So now you're thinking about like turning up in a more obvious way to the broader community of Australia and to politicians. So tell us about your visits to Sydney and what you're trying to achieve there.
Well, we took our issue to Sydney, where I met Jacqui that night. Anyway, we had a dinner which was very kindly hosted by Matt Moran, and there was quite a cross section of people. So I guess that was, again, really trying to raise awareness. I mean, we're out here in the bush. It's hardly a surprise that lots of people don't know about what's happening out here, but I think it was a good awareness, a good raising of awareness, Jacqui.
I think, it was amazing because for me and my electorate, dealing with the PEP 11 issue, when I was out then, because we also had some farmers come down to our local markets as well to raise awareness and to create those linkages between different communities. We're all essentially fighting the same fight, and just how we didn't want, drilling for oil and gas off our beaches. The farmers in Liverpool Plains don't want drilling for, coal seam gas on their beautiful farmlands and, in the most fertile area of Australia, basically. And then also that linkage that, the food we eat actually comes from that area, and, people should care about this. So I think there were a lot of similarities in terms of connecting people with the stories and the implications of, coal and oil and gas mining, and also seeing the political ways that we could work together. So as a result of that dinner where, I met Kate and others, some independent candidates and I, working with Lock the Gate and other organisations worked, and I think the Environment Defenders Office as well, put forward a proposal. We hadn't had the bill drafted, but we put forward amendments to the planning scheme to basically make sure that climate change was considered in the approvals process for these new coal and gas fields. And as such, by doing that, and also an amendment allowing community groups to be able to fight approvals, to open the door for challenges, particularly that was, with the focus of Liverpool Plains, and to make Liverpool Plains an exclusion area as well. So yes, Kate, it was successful. The only thing that wasn't successful is that more of us didn't get in, but the dinner was awesome.
I think that that overarching, desire to address climate change actually links electorates everywhere. So, there isn't a direct link necessarily between the Liverpool Plains and Sydney electorates, but this project is going to, release an obscene amount of fossil fuels.
So, Kate, this notion of like harnessing your energy for direct action, as you expand and trying to raise awareness into the urban capital of your state, are you also doing the same thing in trying to connect out to other rural areas in New South Wales?
So we do work with other groups. So we work with the Malali Gas Pipeline Accord to the west of us, and then the Hunter Gas Landholders Rights Alliance. That so they're very people along the pipeline, because obviously the pipeline is also goes across a very large area as well. So there's certainly that ensures we're all working together, because it is and I think that the proponent and the government probably on purpose, overtly breaks it down to make it harder for people to process. But we know if we stick together, we will fight a better fight. Yeah. And I should say the Narrabri Gas Project is approved, but there's still a mountain of conditions that it needs to meet before it can actually go into production, including getting the pipeline finalised. Yep.
So do you feel hopeful that increasing awareness in the urban areas of your state will actually make a difference to your group?
Well, I think again, I think we've successfully made it to be a bit of an election issue, probably not quite to the extent of PEP 11, but I think that then empowered the representatives to then take that cause further.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting issue to think about in terms of when we all have issues in our own communities that we want to deal with and make a difference to, and deciding on our strategy and how to employ, raise the consciousness and employ the voice of people beyond our own area, and whether that's going to be a strategy that's going to be useful to us. So we might come back and talk about that in a minute, Kate. In the meantime, I'm going to talk to Suzie, because Suzie, you're in an electorate that has an independent member of parliament, yep, but a National Party member at the state level, and a local council that would have probably been quite happy for this project just to have gone ahead without all the disruption the community has created it.
Yeah, I think that's right. As far as the council is concerned, I don't think sorry, I've got the stutters. I don't think initially they were aware or understood the implication of what was going to happen. And local government has no jurisdiction over rail land anyway. So they were surprised when two members of the community came to them with an alternative plan and said, we've got an alternative plan to what the ARTC want to do in Benalla for the Inland Rail project. And council was quite amazed by that. So a public meeting was held, and the wider community were informed exactly what ARTC intended for Benalla, and council did support that. And the ARTC took the alternative plan back and said, we will assess it. And surprise, surprise, came back and said, no, they rejected it because it wasn't within scope, too expensive, couldn't explain their reasons for not approving it, just dismissed it because they were so determined to do what they wanted to do. As a result of that, the community was then, and the publicity that those meetings got, the community was very aware of this threat that was against our town, visually, and the operations of our railway precinct. And they very quickly came on board. The first group, which was just a group of 5 people, stood back because the pressure of facing the community, speaking in public meetings, dealing with bureaucrats and council was too much for them. So another group stepped forward and formed Better Benalla Rail, and immediately set about creating a strategic plan of action to fight what the ARTC was proposing. So it's a very localised issue, unlike your issues, Kate and Jacqui, which are bigger and beyond your boundaries. Ours are all very local. And it's because Benalla had a local issue, Glenroe and Euroa up and down the line. We found it best to form the North East Alliance so that we had a united voice. And each was still handling their issues independently, but we had an overarching group name, the North East Rail Alliance. And we were all within Helen's electorate. And so it was much easier for her to represent all of us rather than each of us individually. With our strategic plan, we wrote and spoke to everybody, every politician, relevant politician, every organisation. We dealt with the ARTC. They had stakeholder liaison officers who regularly changed. So what one liaison officer said, the other didn't say, well, that was not in my time, and would virtually start again, which was very difficult. We tried to communicate with more senior members of the ARTC, and it was impossible to get to senior officers, so we wrote to the chairman. We challenged everything that the ARTC did. We exposed them for not mentioning that there are any rivers between Seymour and Albury, when there are major rivers that flood and affect our towns, and particularly Benalla and Euroa. And what a huge omission, and a purposeful omission from a report to ministers for the environment and so on. We exposed all of those things, and it proved that these plans that were drawn in South Australia without any local knowledge, you know, the weaknesses of those plans. We reviewed every aspect and compared every aspect of what we wanted to do with our alternative plan, which was the community drawn plan, which was just to relocate a small section of track which would negate the need for any overpass. And still the ARTC rejected that. They thought that relocating track was more expensive than building a new overpass.
So Suzie, I'm just going to interrupt you there and just say to you, this is a community group that worked really hard and tried everything and knocked on doors and knocked on doors, and no answers were coming. And we've often talked about the fact that communities can get burnt out because they just get locked out.
Yep.
You know, you can spend so much time writing letters and trying to speak with ministers.
Exactly.
So tell us about what difference it has made to have an independent member of parliament, and the understanding that Better Benalla Rail and the North East Rail Alliance have been able to develop with her about what she is able to do to enable the community groups.
I was thinking through what you were saying as you were saying it and missed your tag, but the two fantastic things that Helen did, she was unconditional about her support. She arranged for the Deputy Prime Minister to come to Benalla, Wangaratta and Euroa to see for himself what the impact of these proposals might have on our stations. That was a huge coup for an independent to bring the Deputy Prime Minister, leader of the National Party, and the minister responsible for the Inland Rail project to come to Victoria. He came and he saw. He was very understanding, very encouraging, but went away without making any firm commitments. The second thing that Helen did, which was the most pivotal, is that she arranged for Better Benalla Rail and the Euroa Community Group for us to speak in Melbourne at the Senate inquiry into the Inland Rail project. We were able to present our case. By the end of that day, the chairman of that group said that the proposal that the community had put forward to relocate track was the best plan for Benalla. That was a huge coup is the word I'm looking for the community. But it took ARTC, they still tried to fight on against even the chair of that Senate inquiry, and his outcome took 6 months before they finally agreed that they would relocate the track. Community consultation is very difficult. And just as Alana says, you can write 1 million letters, you get encouragement back, but you don't really feel as though it has changed anything. It was the actions that Helen instigated that really achieved the positive outcome that we have had.
So we often talk here in Di about this notion of the Member of Parliament being a resource to the community and being able to facilitate community action. And what we're seeing in terms of the North East Rail Alliance is an example of that, isn't it? It's
She did exactly that.
Yeah, it's not a community going to the Member of Parliament with a problem and saying, please fix this, but it's going to the Member of Parliament and saying, can we partner with you and you can open doors for us and help us get what we want to say heard.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. The thing, we always made it clear that we weren't against the Inland Rail project, just how it was going to affect us. And there's a subtle difference between being very critical of a project. It was how it was going to impact us, and Helen helped us be heard with our arguments for our community.
Yeah. So this notion of sort of doing politics differently and members of parliament who are independent being available to their communities in a different way is really, this is an example of that. And something that can, we can all aspire to, because the more community independence we have who are able to do this for their communities, open doors, create pathways, then the more productive community action is going to be, rather than people getting despondent and burnt out because they get nowhere.
That's exactly right, Alana. Yeah.
And just one more question for you, Suzie. I know that the particularly Better Benalla Rail is a very non-political partisan group, so it has people on it who wouldn't have even voted for Helen. Can you just tell me what it's like being part of a group where not everybody's necessarily on the same political page, but they're prepared to work with their Member of Parliament together?
That has been the most wonderful outcome. We are politically, and our committee, politically and socially very diverse. And yet we've become great friends and a fantastic team, because each person in our committee contributes something that has made us solid as a committee and as a group. And that has been wonderful. Party politics has not played a role in this. Helen being an independent has been wonderful because nobody had to take sides. The sides were shown by the curious or non-responses that we got from the other politicians, but often disappointed members of our committee who thought that they would be championed by those whose politics they actually support. But it is Helen. Every single person, not only in our committee, but in our town, knows that having our independent member has helped us achieve this. And it was reflected in the results of the last election.
Great. Thanks, Suzie. So, Jacqui, a very different story for you. So I was fascinated when we met and I spoke to you about your decision to stand for the New South Wales election and the pathway that you had come up with to try and get some traction around this issue. So you're in a very different situation in not having members of parliament that were going to be on side with you. So tell us about your decision when you made the statement, I think, to me, that really the only way to affect change is to get the right people into parliament.
Yeah, so I mean, I was working at a federal level, so I'd worked on Dr. Sophie Scomps's campaign, and obviously she was successful, and I was her advisor and having an absolute, huge job satisfaction working with her. And so when I was approached by some people in the community to and the independent group whether I would consider running, initially, for a range of reasons, I thought, no, not me. I think imposter syndrome being one of them. You think, well, I'm not electable and, there's someone out there better than me. But also I was really enjoying my job, and a lot of the issues that had always spurred me on my whole life had been, probably more federal level and, climate change and so forth. And I felt that I was working on that at a federal level with Sophie. Having said that, when I actually stopped and reflected on, okay, what is important to me how does that play out at a state level? You know, you come to the realization that a lot of things actually get implemented at a state level, and it's just as critically important, you know, as Suzie just said, at a state level as it is at a federal level. And so I went on a bit of a journey to look at, okay, what's been done by my current member who was retiring, that was Rob Stokes, who is likely to replace him, and what's their track record, because the person who was likely to replace him was also a councillor, so I was able to go through his voting record. And obviously this issue, because it's a local issue, had come up in council as well. So I looked back through the meeting notes and saw that when council had moved a motion to what word did they use? I think it was to condemn PEP 11. You know, that's, as I said, no one in my community, I think, would disagree with that motion. But, you know, lo and behold, my opponent, Rory Amon, had actually voted against the motion to condemn PEP 11. And here I was thinking, gosh, there's so much action in our community to fight this thing. And someone who's an elected representative at a council level has had the opportunity to condemn this. And I think the actions of the motion were, you know, advocated at a federal level to, you know, state and federal level to get those members to do something about it. I honestly, I was gobsmacked that how an elected representative would not vote for a motion like that. And it became acutely aware that, you know, unless we get the right people into Parliament with caring about the issues that the community cares about, then we run the risk of electing someone who is just at complete odds with the community in terms of standing up for this issue. So it was a huge factor in my decision to run. And yet, when we're talking about strategies, I think it's the same as what happened at a federal level. And, you know, I've got to also just credit Zali for her bill on trying to stop PEP 11 as well at a federal level, which occurred before the federal elections when all the independents came in, and then she's re-entered that bill recently. So it's something that she's pioneered. But at a state level, it became, you know, acutely obvious that in our seat of Pittwater, unless someone stood up on this issue, then we were, you know, getting a member who wouldn't be taking action. Now I have to smile because a lot's happened in the last 24 hours, as I was saying to you, Alana, and in fact, this particular person who is now the member for Pittwater, has actually put forward the bill that I worked with existing members of the crossbench to draft during my election campaign. He's now actually putting that forward. So I think if we're talking about strategies as well, the other strategy was, yes, not just running and making this an election issue, but also one of the strategies that I decided to take was, working as a group and working with existing members of the New South Wales government. So Justin Field in the upper house and also Alex Greenwich in the lower house, working with them. They were already in Parliament. I worked with them to draft a bill that we then stood together and with other independent candidates as well, and presented the bill during the election campaign, being a state approach to how we could stop PEP 11, and saying that, we've got the bill here and ready, and we will be, putting this into New South Wales Parliament should we be successful. So I think the second strategy there was not just making it an election issue, but also, taking that action to have a bill drafted that we could physically show people that action was possible. And this was in the context of the existing state member for my seat, blatantly saying there's nothing New South Wales can do. This isn't, this shouldn't be an election issue. Jacqui, Scruby and others should keep quiet. So that was a strategy as well to say, hang on, we've got people in the existing New South Wales Parliament who actually, have been able to draft a bill, and this is it. And then also on that strategy, working as a team with other independents, not having this ownership or ego over a particular bill, but actually bringing in the, collaborating with other independent candidates as well in order to give that strength and make it media and newsworthy as well.
So a couple of really interesting things that have really become apparent to me as I've spoken to you in the last few days, Jacqui, this whole notion of finding other champion members of Parliament. So you might find yourself in a situation where your members of parliament at either state or federal level aren't on board with the issue that you want, but the thought of going out and actually looking for other champions who can actually be a voice for your community on an issue in parliament, I think is something that perhaps people haven't stretched their thinking to enough. So I'm interested for you to talk about that a little bit more, about that notion of how you go about finding champion MPs.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important. And I think, I know not working in Sophie's office at a federal level as well, there's always this issue with, time and resources of a member, and that member, having an obligation to, I suppose, serve their constituents first, even above maybe a peak body on a particular issue. So I think in order to get, other members of parliament in other seats caring about your local issue, I think, it's similar to what Kate did, like organising an event that actually brings people together and maybe explores how those similarities on this issue are important. I mean, I thought that event was really, really effective. Secondly, having connections with other constituents in that group as well. So you can come in as, an organisation and a peak body and meet with that member of parliament if they're on your radar as caring about similar issues, but also if you know constituents in that area who would be willing to also come from the bottom up as you do the top down. And also, of course, the upper house members, which, they're not linked to a particular electorate, they're just representing, a state basically. So they're also, I think, an underutilised, I suppose, resource in fighting some of these issues as well.
Yeah. And then added to that, your thoughts about creating a bill that could actually be introduced to Parliament, whether you were there or not, is also a fascinating strategy. So tell us about the notion of like how you would go about getting someone to draft a bill and take it forward for you.
Well, I think the first principle is because of the resourcing issue with members of parliament. I mean, members of parliament love fully baked cakes. So when you go to a member of parliament with an issue, they don't want to hear about the issue without a solution, because, if you're coming to them saying this is the issue, what's the solution? Yep. They don't have time to think of the solution. That's where community groups really need to do the work if they have an issue, to say, yes, this is an issue, but also this is the solution that I'm asking you to do. This is the action I want you to take. And if it is an amendment to an act, then as a community group, I think community groups can work to identify, well, which act would we be amending? Which clauses of the act would we be amending? How would that operate? And almost do the thinking to then go to those meetings with the members of parliament and say, look, this is the silver, there are no silver bullets, but, this is the silver bullet in terms of the action you can take, as well as say maybe going to, to advocate on our behalf for, the minister for whatever the cause is. So I think a bill is really effective, because sometimes, like with the PEP 11 or like with the amendments we proposed to the planning scheme to potentially support Kate and others out at Liverpool Plains, sometimes they can be quite simple, small amendments and have a huge impact. And similar to what Zali did with her bill as well, it can be very powerful to have that bill ready. It makes it newsworthy. So in terms of how you would go about doing that, always having a couple of lawyers on board would be great. The Environment Defenders Office is always a community legal group that should be engaged in issues such as this, and also any other not-for-profits who are working on that particular issue but do have an understanding of the nuances of the law around that. So that might be, Lock the Gate in Kate's in Kate's, field of interest, or it might be, Surfrider Foundation for PEP 11. And I suppose that whole idea of collaboration, and then approaching, as we discussed, the appropriate member of parliament as well to say, look, can you get this drafted? Can you get around this, and can we get it happening? And then obviously that process then starts the MP engaging the parliamentary library or the drafters to draft a bill. And I suppose as soon as they get that draft, they're halfway there in their own thinking about them being an advocate for that sort of amendment.
Yeah. Thanks, Jacqui. I've found this a fascinating conversation, not only because of the incredible work the three of you have done, but just the different contexts that communities are in around the issues that are important to them, all the things that they have to take into consideration. and the limitations they have. And Cathy was talking at the session this morning about communities doing the work. And I listened to all of you and think about the communities that are doing the work. The work is hard sometimes, and hearing that you have so carefully and strategically worked out how to get the best traction, how to be the most effective you can, how to use the energy and the time you have in the most effective way, I think is really instructive, because we can spend a lot of time getting wearied by engaging in activity that actually is not getting us anywhere. And that often happens, as Suzie said, when you try and knock on the doors or write letters to everyone and you just keep getting knocked back. So I'm going to finish off saying...
Alana, I might just add in there as well, like, I think having those discussions in the community groups about that exact issue and saying, you know, there is an election coming up in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. You know, maybe we should run a candidate. Maybe we should start a voices group, or maybe someone from our group should be a candidate, or we should look for one, because, you know, I'm a big, as we're all on this call, big believers in then if we care about an issue, getting the right person into Parliament. If you're finding you're getting knocked back by your local member, start having those discussions early, and it should be part of your strategy, because, you know, often it's left very late and you're scrambling to find, you know, an independent candidate when actually, you know, I know another electorate up the coast in New South Wales, they had all these different community groups, and when you look at them fighting for all these issues, you think there's so many similarities. If they all just got together and thought who can best represent us on these issues and run a candidate, that should be part of their strategy, and often that's lacking.
So I think you've given us the best wind-up we could possibly have, Jacqui, because for the Community Independence Project, you know, you've ended on the point that we continually want to make all the time, and that is that stepping up and actually creating change in your electorate to get different representation. You started off your whole session saying we have to have the right people in Parliament. Well, that's very true. And so it's incumbent on all of us to think how we get the representation that we need around the issues that are important to us. So Jill's there now, I'm going to wind up, but Suzie and Kate and Jacqui, just a fascinating conversation about different communities, different issues, and different strategies being employed by community to try and create change around those issues. So thank you very much.
Oh, it was absolutely an incredibly useful conversation for those of us who wonder whether we can be courageous enough to make any change. It was just lovely to hear it all and to hear how diverse your groups are. So thank you. And thank you, Alana, for doing a stupendous job of walking us through those case studies. I'm looking forward to seeing another 3 case studies this time next year from some other communities. So thank you very much.